Everybody for coming after the rambunctiousness of last night's festivities. And I think this morning's keynote was actually a wonderful bridge into this particular topic, which we're going to start talking about organizational incentives and how it influences the behavior of clinicians and hospitals themselves and their prescribing practices. So what I hope you remember from this talk, in this work we're going to investigate how organizational incentives influence the adoption and abandonment of medical devices in hospitals. Right? We're going to look at two different triggers for abandonment, namely the emergence of a superior technology, as well as the efficacy of an established technology being questioned. What I'm going to find is actually, I think, pretty interesting. When a superior technology emerges, what we find is that for-profit organizations will abandon technologies faster than nonprofit organizations. We're further going to find that organizations with incentives to adhere to norms of science will also abandon faster. However, if the efficacy of the technology is questioned, we're going to find that for-profit organizations will actually very slowly abandon the technology, notably if it can still be exploited for economic gain. However, organizations which adhere to these norms of science will abandon the technology very quickly. And interestingly, we're going to find out that individual level incentives really don't influence these abandonment and adoption patterns. They really are an organizational level phenomenon. So if we take a brief, so for those of you who are IT scholars, it turns out we know quite a bit about adoption. We know that it happens on this nice Rogers curve, and there are multiple generations of the technology, and if you just go out and Google technology adoption, you get about 114,000 hits on Google Scholar. So I think we've covered technology quite a bit. But we really don't know all that much about abandonment, right? There's mixed evidence on what factors will influence the abandonment of technology. There's really been no systemic comparison across why abandonment is occurring. And, if you just do the exact same search, you get 600 results. So there's a slight imbalance in our focus on adoption versus abandonment of technologies. So the research questions that we're going to propose today are the factors that predict organizational abandonment of technology the same as those that influence organizational technology adoption, right? Further, how do varying organizational incentives moderate the rate of abandonment if it's triggered by the emergence of a superior technology or if the efficacy of an established technology is questioned? The context that I'm going to look at this in is the treatment of stable coronary arterial disease, which is more commonly known as heart disease. It's currently the leading natural cause of death in the world. It's the leading cause of death in the United States. I think one person dies of it every 16 seconds, so that'd be about almost 100 people during my presentation. So that's fun, right? And we're going to look at it using stents, right? So how stents have emerged for the treatment of stable coronary arterial disease. And stents offer a really nice way to look at the adoption and abandonment of technology within serial generations, because we have different types of stents emerging and being questioned over the life cycle of the product. Right? So before 1995, you really could either treat heart disease with pharmacology or do a coronary artery bypass graft. In 1995, the FDA approved bare metal stents. In 2002, you have the introduction of drug-eluting stents, an emerging superior technology. And then finally, in 2005, the AHA and the ACC released this guideline which suggests that you should no longer stent for low-severity heart disease patients. Right? The context that we're going to look at this is within hospitals. We're going to distinguish between three types of hospitals, right? Namely, hospitals with a for-profit status, so those who have strong financial incentives. Those with not-for-profit status are going to serve as our base case, and academic medical centers, which are going to serve as those hospitals with both strong financial incentives and strong social incentives to adhere to the norms of science. Right? And we're going to argue that each organization's identity may lead to difference in practices and the adoption and abandonment patterns therein. So, we know quite a bit about technology adoption, but research on abandonment has lagged. And even though there is wide agreement on when abandonment should occur, the empirical evidence is really incredibly mixed, right? So if you look at Grieve's study of strategic failure, you see this huge diffusion of the abandonment of a practice almost immediately as soon as it begins. If you look at this and look at managerial structures within a hospital, Burns and Holy, there's almost no diffusion of the abandonment of the medical structure. And really strikingly, this is true in the medical context as well. So if you think about gastric freezing, it was a process that was abandoned well before the medical evidence that undermined it was ever released. If you look at pharmacology, this Finkelstein and Gilbert piece is a really nice one. You have mixed levels of abandonment that occur. when new drugs come out. And finally, if you look at something like an episiotomy, it continues to be used very widely, even though the medical evidence has been really is pretty clear cut that these are negative things. It shouldn't be done. So my first hypothesis, incentives, norms, and the adoption of superior technology. This is really going to be a maintained hypothesis from what we know in the literature. Right? Nascent technologies offer financial benefits to firms. Right? You can bill customers at a premium rate for service. You can increase the economic efficiency of knowledge and assets that are held by the firm. You can allow the firm to penetrate untapped markets. Right? And they also offer social benefits. We adopt cutting-edge technologies. We may increase organizational prestige. And we also adhere to norms of science. So we get this kudos effect from adhering to a superior state, right? So we adhere to the norms of skepticism, communalism, and disinterestedness. So from that, we propose our first two hypotheses. Organizations with stronger financial incentives will adopt emerging technologies faster than those without them, and organizations adhering strongly to the social norms of science will adopt emerging technologies faster. However, if you think about these hypotheses, there's really an implicit corollary which emerges. Right? Insofar as when a new technology is used or adopted, its utilization comes at the expense of the technology which is already there. Right? So as one rises, the other must fall, and it becomes the twin. So as a result, if we think about emerging technologies, there's an implicit corollary, an implicit set of hypotheses, which organizations with stronger financial incentives to profit maximize will abandon antiquated technologies faster than those without those incentives. And organizations adhering strongly to the social norms of science will abandon antiquated technologies faster as well. Right? But as I said, there's two reasons that abandonment might occur. The second is question efficacy. Right? Not always is there a new and emerging technology which is superior. Right? So if someone comes along and questions the efficacy of the technology, you wonder how people will react to that, especially if it can still be exploited for economic gain. Right? And there's a lot of reasons that we might see this slowed rate of abandonment. Right? One, abandoning technology is expensive. You have the sunk cost of adoption. You might cannibalize a revenue stream by not being able to effectively exploit the other technology. The organization might fall prey to organizational pathologies in the form of competency traps or confirmation biases, i.e. they may simply disregard the emerging information. And in the presence of strong financial incentives, abandonment is likely to be slower if the efficacy of the technology is uncertain, but it can still be exploited. So we're there going to propose the third hypothesis, which is organization with stronger financial incentives to profit maximize will abandon technologies when their efficacy is questioned slower. However, if we think about the norms of science and organizations that adhere to the norms of science, the idea of not abandoning a technology whose efficacy is questioned really violates these norms of disinterestedness. Right? Because then the organization is acting for financial gain instead of for the common scientific enterprise, right? The benefit of us all. Further, it may lose the organizational prestige that it garnered by adopting superior technologies in the first place. It might lose human capital and so on and so forth. So in context, if you think about an academic medical center, their mission is the synergistic mix of research, education, and patient care. Right? They need to adopt avant-garde medical procedures and be existing at the cutting edge if they want to recruit high-quality students. Right? So therefore, propose our third hypothesis, or the end of our third hypothesis, which is organizations incentivized to adhere to the norms of science will abandon technologies whose efficacy is questioned faster than not-for-profit organizations. So my quick recap: financial incentives and norms of science lead to faster adoption, faster abandonment of antiquated technologies. However, financial incentives will lead to a slower abandonment of technologies whose efficacy is questioned, and a faster abandonment of technology when efficacy is questioned if you strongly adhere to the norms of science. Okay, so how do I test this? We're going to test this using data from the Florida Agency for Healthcare Administration. What it is a census of patients admitted to hospitals in the state of Florida. We're going to augment that with information from the Council of Teaching Hospitals, which gives us information on whether or not they're part of an academic medical center. I'm going to use two restrictions. We're going to drop all patients suffering from a heart attack because they, by definition, have unstable coronary arterial disease, and we're going to get rid of all patients treated with a coronary artery bypass graft. Variable definitions, I'm going to use 3 different data sets and 4 dependent variables to test this. Right? Data set 1, we're going to look at the FDA release of bare metal stents DV is going to be the 0-1 decision to implant a bare metal stent at any given time. Data set 2, we're first going to look at the 0-1 decision to implant a drug-eluting stent, right, to measure the adoption of a superior technology. And then we're going to use the 0-1 decision to implant a bare metal stent, so the abandonment of the antiquated technology. And finally, data set 3, after the release of this guideline, which questions the efficacy of stents, we're going to use the 0-1 decision to implant a stent of any kind in a low-severity heart disease patient. So we have 4 dependent variables, 3 data sets. Right? And in each case, we're going to constrain the data set to the quarter before the trigger, quarter before this exogenous event, and the 6 quarters afterwards. Okay. Independent variables, as I said, we're going to investigate how hospital incentives moderate this. So not-for-profits are going to serve as the base case. For-profits are strong financial incentives. Academic medical centers are those with incentives to adhere to the norms of science. I'm going to interact this with the linear time spline. And we're also going to replicate the analysis with time series dummies because of the linearity constraint that splines are going to enforce in the model. Right. Controls, I'll throw in fixed effects for heart, race, gender, hospital, physician, type of heart disease. We have enough fixed effects to kill 10 men. It's a long, long list of what we have. All right. And the empirical specification is going to be an LPM, basically because we're dealing with such an incredible amount of data. We're just going to use the linear probability model with robust standard errors clustered at the hospital level. So what we're going to do is make our estimation, then sequentially introduce hospital and physician fixed effects, which will result in some of the estimators being dropped, and we're going to use the same estimation procedure on each of the data sets individually. Okay, so clearly it works. Nobody laughs at that. So what we see is that when superior technology emerges, financially incentivized hospitals adopt significantly faster. However, socially incentivized hospitals adopt even fastest, both the emergence of bare metal stents and drug-eluting stents. When we look at the abandonment of bare metal stents after the release of drug-eluting stents, abandonment mirrors adoption. And finally, when we look under question efficacy, this relationship flips. Insofar as for-profit hospitals abandon almost not at all. But academic medical centers drop like a rock in their utilization of stents after the guideline comes out for low-severity patients. And it's pretty apparent just from the graphs, too, right? If we look, academic medical centers adopt significantly faster, followed by for-profits, followed by not-for-profits. The same thing happens when we introduce drug-eluting stents, and then we have the same pattern of drop-off of bare metal stents after drug-eluting stents are introduced, and it changes significantly when the guideline is introduced, when we have questioned efficacy. Okay. So, a series of robustness checks. I'm running a little low on time, so I'll kind of get through them quickly. The first is to check all severe SCAD patients. So recall that the guideline only applies to low-severity heart disease patients. So to make sure, we want to make sure that there isn't just a major abandonment of stenting overall. All right, so if we regress them only on severe SCAD patients, we see no significant effect. All right. The second question is whether or not this is an organizational effect versus an individual effect. So we're therefore going to introduce a new moderator, which is faculty members. Right? Arguably, faculty members should adhere to the norms of science more than non-faculty members. Think to yourself, you do this. Right? And we're going to interact the faculty placement with each of our different hospital variables. So it creates the 3-way interactions. Clearly from the results, you have consistent patterns of adoption and abandonment, which is pretty evident from the graph. So you have faculty members and non-faculty members remaining strongly clustered in the adoption of bare metal stents, adoption of drug-eluting stents, the abandonment of bare metal stents, and the abandonment of all stents post-guideline. We're next going to look at freelancers, because the faculty members give us this nice preliminary evidence that this is an organizational level incentive. But it's possible that faculty may be, or these physicians may be sorting into hospitals where they agree with how things are executed. So what we're going to do is find all hospitals or all physicians who are operating in multiple organizational contexts simultaneously, and we're going to see how they change their behavior when they are in different organizational settings concurrently, right? And we're going to replicate our analysis using only those physicians. Basically, if we look at the graphs, we see the exact same patterns again, and exact same patterns again. So the results suggest that organizational incentives strongly influence the adoption and abandonment of medical devices in hospitals. when a superior technology emerges, both for-profit incentives and incentives to adhere to the norms of science influence these organizations to adopt technology. However, if the efficacy of a medical treatment is questioned, you have a very divergent response in how the organizations react. Most importantly, these are results of organizational level incentives. I see that my time is up, so we make many contributions, and I thank you very much for your time.
Hi, I'm Bianca Frogner. Thank you for the opportunity to review this paper. It was a really interesting one because it's really trying to focus on the idea of abandonment, which is not very well studied in the literature. And they have this interesting scenario here where stents are being changed over time. Basically, there's a substitute that came onto the market, and then guidelines came about and said, stop doing that. So the question is, who follows these rules and who adopts these new technologies? So I think mostly when I came up to this, I think the question was, why don't more people write about this, failed technologies, like the gull wing on a car, a Betamax, a translator for cat meows, Bengay aspirin, the square egg. Why don't more people write about that? Versus why do a lot of people talk about this, the replacement of Blockbuster with Netflix? So, I think one of the key things about how this is set up is that it's asking this question of, is there a financial incentive here that forces some hospitals or motivates some hospitals to switch fast, especially if there's does that matter in terms of there being a cheaper alternative on the scene? There's also this question of, are there some reputation aspects, especially for academic medical centers, where they want to seem to be leading edge, so they might, again, drop one technology and adopt another one? It's not so clear what the not-for-profit should be doing, but it seems like they should be somewhere in between. So this is kind of the question that this paper is trying to answer, is trying to figure out whether or not people's motivations are actually being demonstrated in the actual marketplace. I think that generally this paper should try to maybe distinguish between what it means to abandon versus adopt when there's a substitution on the marketplace. For example, when we talk about abandonment in this slide, in period 2, they are abandoning, but there's really another substitute clearly there on the marketplace. That's a very different situation than in period 3, where basically there's no clear substitute on the marketplace, although that seems to be a little questionable because it seems like you talk about pharmacological options as a substitute, so I'm not so sure if that really was a substitute or if that just means we're just going back to status quo, which was back pre-1995. Yesterday on my panel, there was someone who spoke about the abandonment of health IT, that they basically said they just got rid of a system because it didn't work for them, and then maybe at a later period in time they adopted another system again. That's a very concerning kind of process where there was clearly a real financial investment and a potential financial loss, but it was a risk that was taken on by the organization to try to be a leader. They realized it didn't really work, so they had to go back to the drawing board. There was no clear next step. And I think in this situation, it always seemed like there was a clear next step here. So I'm not so sure if your definition of abandonment really seems to follow, at least my understanding of what abandonment should probably be, which is you put in a significant financial investment and you're just at a loss, and then you're like, what, I'm stuck with my Betamax, I don't know what to do next. Versus, in this case, I really do think you have 2 periods of substitution here. It'd be interesting to get a third line on here, which is what happens with what's the next thing after saying stop using drug-eluting stents among the a certain population, like what happens there? I think actually what would be more interesting is who are these people which hospitals are adopting in that early period versus the latter period within each of the for-profit versus not-profit and versus academic medical centers. I'd be curious to know whether or not there are some local competitive effects in the area that are driving that switch over. I'm curious to know what kind of characteristics of these hospitals are leading them to want to be on that leading edge of the adopter, where they're taking a high financial risk of investing in a new technology with no clear gain, unless it turns out that that technology works, in which case they might actually have a financial gain. I'd be curious to know whether or not there's a certain hospital specialty within especially among the doctors that are there versus the actual hospital's specialty. I didn't see that there was a distinction between hospitals that say that they are a heart-specific kind of a focus, because that would be helpful to know if there's certain types of hospitals that are leading on the leading edge versus the lagging edge. So, but otherwise, I mean, I think it was a well-motivated paper. Otherwise, I just think that it just needs to have a little bit more clear discussion about what it really means to be truly abandoning versus doing some sort of substitution. So, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure to present my job market paper, Profit Complementarities in Adopting EMR, here. So this paper tried to understand the profit complementarities in the adoption of EMR by standalone hospitals. Standalone hospital means the hospital is an independent organization corresponding to the hospital that belong to a large hospital system. The adoption decision for a large hospital system is very complicated, which cannot be captured in a relatively simple model. That's why I will only focus on standalone hospital in my study. I construct a dynamic oligopoly model of technology adoption to evaluate using the market-leading technology of EMR. The result will have some potentially important implication in promoting health IT. So in my context, profit complementarities describe a situation that a hospital can benefit from using a vendor that is also adopted by its neighbor. As we all know, EMR is not interoperable, so my study will focus on the profit complementarities in using the largest vendor in the local market. There could be a lot of sources in profit complementarities. For example, a vendor that is well established in the local market will provide a better relationship with the local payers and local providers. It will bring in great cost efficiency if the hospital's platform is compatible with the payer. It's also more likely for a large vendor to provide favorable pricing and sufficient expertise in the implementation of the technology. So on the one hand, hospital can benefit from using the largest vendor, but on the other hand, they will also worry about the loss of patients. A very interesting study published in Health Affairs has such an interesting article. It basically says that hospitals have little incentive to adopt the interoperable technology because they would rather lock in their patient to ensure the brand loyalty. So we can see there are two competing forces here. On the one hand, hospital can benefit from using the largest vendor, but on the other hand, it will hurt from losing patients. So this study tried to examine which is the dominating force and whether policymakers can take advantage of this special property to improve market coordination. Why this is an important question? We all know that the government provide a strong push in the diffusion of health information technology. And in this incentive program, hospitals are free to choose any vendor they want. But since the technology is not interoperable, the resulting information silo actually go against the original goal of the government. At the end of last year, the government agency delayed the rulemaking in the last stage of the incentive program to look for some input on the potential policy to accelerate information exchange. At this moment, I believe the value of using the leading technology will be an important message to the policymakers. If profit complementarity is sufficiently large, establishing a potential standard at the region level can not only bring in cost efficiency, but also improve market coordination. In this paper, I will develop a dynamic oligopoly model. In order to pin down the magnitude of this special property, I require a model of richer structure. And the choice of vendor will be a dynamic decision for the following two reasons. Large hospitals, they will have incentive to adopt early, such that it's more likely for their choice to become predominant in the market. As more and more neighbor hospitals follow their choice, they can benefit later on. But on the other hand, small hospitals will hold up their current decision, wait and see which is the best technology in the market. And ignoring this dynamic element, we're omitting all of this incentive, cause model misspecification. A brief review for the main result. On average, using the leading technology will increase the profit by 32% in each period. And the gain from using the leading technology is asymmetric between large and small hospitals. In my counterfactual analysis, I found that promoting a market-leading technology will cause faster market coordination. And I learned from the keynote speaker today about a very nice summary. Coordination early is very powerful. So my study, first of all, there are a couple of empirical studies examining the adoption decision of EMR, and most of them are involving network externality. My study is also complementary to empirical literature on network externality in the other industry. The main methodology in my study followed the methodology developed by Aggregate Bureau in 2007. It is a typical methodology in the industrial organization. So I'll probably skip this part since most of my audience is an expert in EMR. One thing I want to emphasize here is that the investment in EMR is very expensive. It involves millions of dollars and is not a trivial decision. So the primary data set comes from the HIMSS analytic database, and I also use the AHA annual survey to extract a rich set of hospital characteristics. In my sample, there are 4,500 hospitals over the year 06 to 10. Here is a summary statistic of the key variables in my study. The following table lists the top EMR vendors providing the inpatient EMR system. As we can see, these top 11 vendors account for more than 90% national market share of EMR adoption. And I will use these 11 major vendors plus the additional one, I call it others, to group all the remaining vendor. And these 12 options will become the choice set in my theoretical model. So before I go to the theoretical model, I would like to show you some reduced form evidence. I want to examine which is the dominating force to affect the hospital choice. And in this part, I simply do a multinomial logic regression. The dependent variable is the choice of vendor, and the independent variable include product characteristic of EMR and hospital characteristic. Basically, as we can see, here the MarkDOM is a dummy for market-leading technology, and the interaction between MarkDOM and BIG is the interaction between market-leading technology and large hospital dummy. The takeaway message from here is that hospital can benefit from using the leading technology in the local area. There are some concern about endogeneity about the key variable market-leading dummy. I will use a Hausman type IV to address this issue. Basically, I use an outside market condition to approximate the local market. And the IV specification also provides a similar result here. So beforehand, I showed that profit complementarity will exist the negative impact from competition. And now I want to use a structural model to pin down the value of this of profit complementarity. So the theoretical model, so simply speaking, this is a game of all the hospitals in the local market. Imagine at the beginning of each period, when everybody wakes up, they get a random draw from some distribution. It's a cost shock. It's a private information. And after that, each hospital, they decide whether to adopt or which choice to pick at the same time. A hospital without EMR, they can choose either continue with nothing or they can pick a choice from the choice set. For hospital with EMR, they can choose continue their current choice or they can switch to a different vendor. The action will take effect in the following period, and then the market will evolve. A new purchase from vendor will incur a mean adoption cost. It will differ across vendors, and switching to a different vendor will also incur an additional switching cost. So here is the payoff for a hospital. The blue part represents the payoff from using the vendor J. Consists of the value from using a market-leading vendor, if J is market-leading, and also a variable profit in terms of the bet size for hospital. And the last term is the interaction between the market-leading technology and a large hospital dummy. The last term is to capture the extra gain or loss for the large hospital if they choose the market-leading technology. So here is the Bellman equation for each choice. And the empirical strategy is based on a two-step approach developed by Agribeer and Mirror. And actually, I will probably skip this part. So this following table shows the polyfunction estimate in the first stage. The reason for me to use the policy function is for forward simulation for hospitals' behavior. And I think the most interesting part is the following table is the empirical result for the dynamic estimate. So the first column shows the value of using the market-leading technology, and the second one is the interaction between large hospital dummy and leading technology. As we can see, hospital benefit from using the leading technology, particularly large hospital will benefit more. It's even more than 70% than the small hospitals. And also hospital, they have to bear a significant amount of switching costs when they change vendors. And large hospital will suffer less, which means small hospital, they are in a more unfavorable condition than large hospital. The following table shows the estimate sunk cost for different vendors and the cost saving across vendors. So the beauty of estimating a structural model is to conduct some counterfactual analysis. And the most interesting counterfactual I want to make here is to compare different subsidy regimes. So the outcome variable here is the fraction of market coordination defined by the fraction of hospitals that use the leading technology in the market. And I will do the counterfactual for the new market where most of the hospitals are not adopting anything, and for the mature market where most of the hospitals already adopt EMR, but they cannot talk anyway. Here is an in-sample prediction to see whether my estimate is doing a good job. It seems that both of them are quite close to each other, which means my estimate is doing a decent job here. So here is the counterfactual I want to show. It's a 3D dimension. I want to estimate the relationship between the amount of subsidy and the rate of market coordination across time. So it's a 3D dimension graph. The x-axis, so there are two subsidy programs here. The red surface represents the subsidy towards the hospitals if the hospitals are using the leading technology. And the green surface represents the program in which all the hospitals can get a subsidy as long as they adopt EMR, which means the red surface represents a program with an extra requirement to encourage the usage of the market-leading technology. And as we can see, if the subsidy amount is more than 10% of the average sunk cost, the red surface goes beyond the green one, which means it will cause a better market coordination than the subsidy program, than the unconditional subsidy program. So this is the same graph from a different perspective. I want to show after 3 years, the red surface goes beyond the green one, which means if the subsidy from the government is more than 10% of the average sunk cost, and after 3 years, the red surface totally outperforms the green one, which means if at the early stage, the government can emphasize the usage of an interoperable technology, it will lead to a much better market outcome in coordination than the current incentive program. So the last one is the policy experiment for mature market where most of hospitals adopt EMR, but none of them can communicate with each other. And the subsidy program can be applied to subsidize the switching costs in order to encourage hospitals to switch to the leading technology. And there's two policy program here. One is unconditional subsidy, and the other one is subsidize the hospital if it switch to the leading technology. Again, the program with extra requirement perform better than the other one. So conclusion, I found large profit complementarities in adopting EMR, and my policy experiment shows that the extra requirement to emphasize the adoption of leading technology will really help in the market coordination. Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Emilia Semyonova. I'm from Johns Hopkins University, and I am very happy to be here and to discuss this paper, especially following our great introduction to the session by Jim this morning. I don't know, did you coordinate with these papers? It's really like it just set the scene here, and we just keep going. So it's really good how things played out. So I don't have slides. I have just comments, and I'll try to be brief. I have two sets of comments. The first set of comments are more like big picture comments, and as we heard, that's Zhang's job market paper, so I hope you find them useful. And then I have a couple of comments about the paper in itself. So the big picture here is we spend a lot of time trying to get hospitals and physicians to adopt DMRs, and a lot of subsidies and now penalties are being implemented for them to do that. And we've gotten them to implement, things are happening, and now we have the other problem, which is there's way too many of them out there, and they don't talk to each other. And so, yes, we got them to implement, but some of the complementarities that are happening and synergies that arise from having similar systems that talk to each other are not realizing. And what do I mean here? Well, we want to adopt an EMR because we want patients to be well taken. We want coordination within the hospital, but at some point we also want coordination across hospitals, and this is where this paper comes in. And in terms of the big picture, I think the questions that I have is, given that we have so many different systems, what is the long-term market solution, and have we arrived to that solution yet? It seems like there's way too many out there. How many do you think it's going to be? And what's the actual disaggregated market solution, and can we get there, given the way that things are evolving right now? How long is it going to take to get to that market solution if we believe in the free markets? And if it's too long, then what can we do, which is some of the things that you're doing in your counterfactuals, which I think is where I would see the paper evolving, like more emphasis on that. Like, what can we do? What are the different policies that would get us there faster? And how much is it going to cost, since that's what we also care about. As we know, it's costly to integrate. If we want to get them to switch at this point, how much is it going to cost? And are the benefits of switching going to outweigh the cost of switching? This kind of thing. I think that in order to when you start talking about these things, those of us in the audience here, we know what the problem is. We know what's going on. When you're talking to more broad audiences, it usually helps to diagnose the problem in terms of like what's happening. So I would try to show like a map of penetration of different EMR systems in different geographies. And one of the things that you're relying on is a definition of a market, which I understood as a geographic market. So you're talking about market leaders and so on. Well, what is a geographic market when we're talking about hospitals and hospital systems? So if you show me that everyone in Kansas has Epic and everyone in Minnesota has Siemens, then okay, well, maybe we can live with that. But if you have like much more disaggregated markets, then there is a space here for improvement. That is one of the so that was one of the things one of the questions that I had about like what do you mean by market? You need to define this a little better. How many hospitals are in that market? How many patients are in the market? Are you using the Agency for Healthcare definition, and so on? So these are things that are just setting up your problem and are going to help you put it in perspective. The other thing that I was worried about, and here I'm moving more into the paper-specific things, is you are omitting, there's a lot of hospital consolidation that's been happening over your period, and everybody's buying each other. We've seen this quite a lot. And so right now we're in a brand new world where almost everyone's owned by someone else, and the chains are very successful and so on. So you are omitting these players from the market altogether. And that, I understand is problematic from your estimation standpoint, but then are you also excluding them entirely from the consideration set, in the sense of when you define the market leader, let's assume we know what the market is in your case, is this market leader never a hospital chain? So if I have a hospital chain that's Intermountain or some big gorilla like that, are they out of your consideration set altogether? So if a big hospital chain adopts Epic, does this mean that we don't even think about that, and then we take all the other smaller players and we say, well, who's the biggest player among those? What did they adopt, and is that the market leader? So these are the types of things that came in my mind, and so I think they need to be clarified. And if you can say something about these big these big for-profit chains or non-for-profit chains, then you will be speaking about the large section of the market, and people will appreciate that from just the policy perspective. But I applaud the effort, and I know it's hard to run structural models, so thanks very much, and thank you for the opportunity to be here.
So I was very hopeful this morning that during the course of my talk no one would die, but according to Brent's statistic, about 100 of people will in fact die. So that's very sad.
It's troubling.
Very troubling. Very, very troubling. The other good thing I realize is that it's sometimes nice to go on the second day of a conference because I can skip all of this. I was going to launch off with here are all the anticipated benefits of EMR, but you all know it, and what are we seeing in the literature? What do the results look like? But the woman from yesterday nicely described all of this as uncertain. So we can take that as a given. Our focus, this is going to look very much like a lot of the papers that you saw yesterday, but instead of the effects of EMR on patient outcomes, we're looking at the effects of EMR on billing practices in the hospital, by the hospital, and by the doctor specifically. So these billing changes, what we're calling really billing intensity, and I'll get into more details later. So, why would we expect to see any kind of change in billing intensity because of EMR? These are probably stories that you've heard before. So first of all, documented care, better charge capture. EMR systems, because you have a computer in front of you, it's easier to type, it's easier to capture all the procedures and treatments that are being performed by the doctor, by all the care providers. So we are arguing that this increases billing intensity, as far as we're defining it, not resulting in a change in actual care, but just in better documented care. That's path A1. Second, the two other paths on the bottom, A2 and A3, first of all, the nudging effect, again, which you may have heard before. So this is the notion that these EMR systems now are able, because of the information that they have, because of the rules, the logic that the software can provide, nudges or suggests additional procedures or treatments for the patient. So, for example, Epic has this best practice advisory. There are these alerts that can be programmed based on different rules to provide additional information or suggest just additional procedures to the doctor. This is the nudging effect, which we would argue leads to a change in actual care. More services, more treatments for the patient. The third is the coordination effect. So because these EMR systems have this history of the patient, and possibly because they're able to coordinate with other systems, they can help reduce inefficiencies in care. So we suddenly now know that we don't need to perform this additional test because it was already completed yesterday. So we would argue that this coordination effect would reduce intensity. So we have these two effects, documented care, changes in documented care, changes in actual care. Some of them, we would argue, increase intensity in the form of charges, actual billing charges, procedures, documented procedures, and diagnoses. Whereas nudging would also increase intensity, coordination would reduce that intensity. Now, because we're interested in the effects of the changes in billing practices and this billing intensity, it's useful for us to document why we think this would happen. So what are the incentives driving this kind of behavior? So if we're interested in understanding this at the hospital level, then profits become relevant. And our one of the dynamics that we're looking to tease out is the relationship, the contractual relationship between the hospital and the insurer in terms of these payments. So how do payments differ between inpatient and outpatient care settings? Well, so what we may know is that for Medicare, for Medicaid, these are contracted on fixed price, but for some commercial settings, there are differences between the inpatient and outpatient. For example, in the outpatient care setting, reimbursements, payments are provided on a per charge basis, percentage of charges, whereas for inpatient, at a fixed rate. So we would argue that this incentive, this contractual relationship between the hospital and the insurance company can create the incentive for the hospital to use EMR in these particular kinds of ways. So the data that we have is actually the same as Brent's. It comes from Florida Agency of Healthcare Administration. This is very nice. So this is a data set of 29 million observations, all inpatient, outpatient charges, procedures, diagnoses, and some other information from all hospitals in Florida. Really a great data set. We augment that with the HIMSS analytic data set, which I used to refer to simply as HIMSS, but thanks to Tom and Lauren, I now call it HIMSS Analytics. Which obviously has information on adoption of health IT. And we are looking specifically at advanced EMR, so HPOE and PD. We're ignoring basic for the moment because the adoption rate is so high across Florida. We're only looking at the variation in advanced. We do a bit of recoding of the HIMSS data. We see some instances where there is adoption, there is adoption, there is adoption, there is no adoption, there is no adoption, there is adoption. So for those slight changes, I don't think it makes sense that they would suddenly not adopt the EMR systems. We do some slight recoding. We also augment that with financial data, looking at costs and revenues for the hospital, case mix and wage index. And we aggregate, so we have these 29 million observations, we aggregate them up to the doctor hospital care setting level. So for each doctor who sees inpatients, outpatients at a given hospital in a given year. These are our data. So what we're looking at, first of all, we argue that the billing intensity for outpatient procedures are greater in magnitude relative to the inpatient procedures. Again, driven by this incentive, by the reimbursements across care settings. We're looking at the difference in billing intensity for inpatients and outpatients driven by each of these paths, A1, A2, and A3. And our measure, our dependent variable, our measure of billing intensity, charges, so the mean charges by doctor, by year, by hospital. Diagnoses, the mean number of diagnoses per unit of observation, and procedures, and documented procedures. The model looks very much the same as everyone else's. We have fixed effects, diff and diff. We're looking at the variables of interest or the interaction between outpatient and EMR, the series of controls at the doctor level, at the patient level, hospital level, year, hospital, doctor, outpatient, fixed effects. Again, very similar to everyone else. So our first results show, so we interact simply outpatient and EMR, and we get these results, which are suggesting that we see a reduction in charges of 3.3% for inpatient and an increase of 11.5% in outpatient. And at a first approximation, we might be very happy with this result. However, we think it's wrong. What we're doing here is interacting just a single outpatient EMR. But what this is omitting are potentially systematic differences between the outpatient and the inpatients across all of the covariates. So instead, what we do is create all of those interactions. So we include now in this model all of the interactions, and we get this kind of effect. And we think this is a more appropriate effect. So what we see is no effect on inpatient EMR, but an increase of 5% in the outpatient care setting, which supports our hypothesis. Well, partially supports our hypothesis. Then we look at procedures and diagnoses, and we see no effect. So overall, what this is suggesting is that we see partial evidence, some evidence for a change in billing practices because of EMR, and specifically advanced EMR. It's interesting we see this for charges, but not for procedures and diagnoses. So it's suggesting that doctors are not, there is not more coding, because of the EMR in these data. Endogeneity, everyone's great topic of discussion. I'll skip over a little bit. Suffice it to say that yes, we recognize that it could be a potential problem. What it would take, though, because we have all these fixed effects, we don't rely too much of a crutch on that, but it does suggest that any variation, any problems would need to occur. Any problems would need to be observable and occur at the time-varying hospital level. So you need to have any sort of changes varying by hospital over time. But what we try and do, and really the takeaway, I think, from the paper is, if you're not very compelled by the results, are the ridiculous number of robustness checks that we've really tried to go through. We've taken some of this from the literature. We include lead variables. In a test for reverse causality, in order to test for the fact that maybe there is this trend before the actual adoption, and we don't find any effect of that. We exclude all the non-adopters, so essentially eliminating one of the diffs and diffs, and just looking at the before and after of those who adopted versus did not. We leverage some of the robustness texts of previous literature of Dranov and Aga to control for time-varying hospital effects. And we actually stratify the data, run the regressions for inpatient and outpatient. Of course, we get similar results. We would expect that. We also include the basic and advanced. We compare those just really for fun. And we also look at time outliers and HR outliers in order to understand if there are any systematic differences across time or across geographic regions. So what we're doing here is we're running the same regression on charges, but we're omitting a particular year. And if we do that for these 7 years, we get a distribution of only 7 data points, and we plot that in a box plot. So we do this for inpatient. I'm showing you inpatient on the right, for the years, the box plot on the right-hand side, and for HRR. So again, what we do is run the regression, but omit one of the HRRs at a time. And this gives us a distribution of 22, 27 variables. So what we see, there is no effect. The dotted red lines are the 5% values above and below, and it matches the expectations. We didn't get any significant results before, and we're not seeing anything afterwards. But what we do see is something kind of interesting when we do this for the outpatient context. The year distribution, we're not seeing a lot of variation, which is very nice. You really want to see a very tight box plot, a very tight distribution around that mean. And we see that for the year. But the HRR is a little weird. What we see are 2 particular outliers, one centered around Miami, one centered around Pensacola. So what this is saying is that if you omit Pensacola, then you're going to get a much more significant result. So I'm plotting the t-stat on the left-hand side, sorry. What we're seeing is that the coefficient, and therefore the t-statistic, by removing Pensacola is really very, very high. There's a coefficient of 6.5%, I think. Whereas if we omit Miami, what we're seeing is a much smaller coefficient and therefore a less significant result. So this suggests that Pensacola is really driving down the results, and Miami is really having a very strong effect. There's something very particular going on, very significant going on in Miami. If anyone has any intuition on why that is, other than just it's a big place with lots of patients, I'd be really interested to hear. And that's all I have. Thanks.
Now we're cooking with gas. Okay, so estimating the effects of EMR on medical billing practices. They sent me the paper a week ago, so I had ample time to prepare. The blow-by-blow basically is what is the effect of EMR adoption on hospital charging, rate of diagnosis, and procedures performed. And the gap really is that Jeff McCullough has spent a lot of time investigating the effect of EMR on clinical care outcome. He's working on the problem right now. He's ashamed that I brought this up. But there hasn't really been a lot of work in billing. And the notable exceptions being Adler-Milstein, Jha, Aga, Lee, and so on and so forth. The method is a standard difference in difference OLS estimation, which I did not anticipate the degree of diff and diff that would be at White this year, but it appears that we're becoming a difference in difference White conference. The investigation exists across inpatient and outpatient settings, and the results, EMR adoption increases costs sometimes, is kind of the practical upshot of them, and that the outpatient clinics see a 5% increase in billing, minor decrease in ER billing and inpatient procedure, but kind of the takeaway that as I read through this is that not a lot happens. And what I love about this paper is this is kind of the standard things, like it's this rich, wonderful recombination of data. And I love that it is a no-frills estimation procedure. You know, the authors go through and they state their case, and they state it very cleanly. And they take this old-school approach where you say, we're gonna try and just measure this effect. We're not going to argue hard for causality. We're going to try and rip out the endogeneity pieces as we see them, and we're going to do it with an OLS. You know, they don't try and use the double-inverted Herfindahl quasi-shooting maximal negative binomial Poisson distribution to estimate this and manufacture the effect. Which for PhD students out there, if you don't have a result in OLS, you don't have a result. So stop writing your paper. They very cleanly motivate the gap which exists. And I think the other thing, which other PhD students can take from this, they don't overclaim. They make very clear lines and delineations about what they find and what they don't find, and they don't try to push it too far. That being said, I do have some quibbles with the paper. The results as presented leave me somewhat underwhelmed in that I feel like Ben Stein is reading them to me. It's like, we find a 5% decrease in billing. And if this is really happening, this is interesting, right? Insofar as, you know, they kind of punt on the implications of this. And Idris is a Notre Dame man, so he should know better than that. But they find this really cool result and don't dive into what it would actually mean. Right? How does this actually influence policy? Right? And I think it may be that they're trying to speak to too many audience. Right? It's kind of too wordy for a QJE, not theoretical enough for an MISQ. So perhaps kind of splitting the baby and trying to speak to a lot of audiences at once may be informing why this isn't really happening. The work also appears to go rather wide instead of going deep. Right? And that I was reminded of how I search for my golf ball when I lose it. I kind of go to the location that I think it is and keep going around and around and around until I find it. And they found this thing and they kind of keep staying around the same general area. And there's only one significant result, and the research stays at that level. So could we look across departments? Can we look across conditions? Can we change the level of analysis? Right? To a city level, to a patient level, to a department level? Can we start breaking all of this up and looking in different places? Right? Obviously, the identification problem is still there because of endogenous EMR adoption. I guess because we talked about this as a conference so much, my comments will kind of apply to most of the papers that were applied yesterday. You know, are these hospitals different pre-treatment? You know, the literature suggests that this is unlikely, but it's a hugely strong assumption in the difference in difference model. So why not do a relative time model? Mostly Harmless has a wonderful explanation of this. And the relative time model also allows you to see if you're masking the effect ex post, so you can see the trend as it emerges. So I think the authors need to continue their quest for the 3 career-changing stars of significance. You know, do the within-physician experiment, right? Do a course and exact match on the hospitals. Do a look-ahead propensity score match. Try and keep eliminating these sources of heterogeneity from the data. And I think all of these can be done with every diff and diff that's been seen. Investigate at the patient level, so match the patients too. See what's happening for the patients themselves. You know, it's just, you're leaving money on the table in a really, really rich data set to say it increases costs for outpatient procedures. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning again.
Good morning.
Thank you for being here on the second day, first session, so I know you're really interested. And I also realize that I'm the one standing between you and the shot of coffee, so I'll be quick. This is work that I'm doing with my colleagues in Germany and England, so a little bit of a change of pace. It's not about EMR or EHR. It's not even about Obamacare or anything. It's actually across the pond. Data is from England. And here we were looking at how investment in IT, in various forms of IT, helps the reputation of hospitals. So let me just move ahead. There was a story that was told yesterday in one of the presentations about which hospital would you go to, depending on the EMR that they had. I'd piggyback on that story and ask you, which hospital would you go to? The one on the right, the one on the left? On the right. Don't be so sure, because the one on the right that shows a tablet PC, assuming a physician with a tablet PC, tells a story about the now notorious case of a Presbyterian in Texas, where the Ebola case happened, and there was a little quote I saw on BBC quoting one of the physicians saying, there's so much technology that they forget to even talk to the patient and ask questions about the symptoms. To which I think that if they had a little bit more technology that would have a checklist, they would have probably figured out that this patient is likely to have Ebola. On the left-hand side, with somebody taking notes on a paper, I saw this top 10 list of mistakes that physicians make, and number 8 was that in spite of having an EHR, they have cheat sheet with notes on paper that they keep on the side, which never make it into the EHR and therefore are not available for others. So we would like to go to the hospital on the right, but that also has issues and challenges, particularly when you don't invest properly in IT that captures all the information that you need. And Presbyterian probably doesn't need the bad press. That's all over the place in newspapers and on TV. So it does affect their reputation. Anecdotally, we know. So what we tried to do here was to look at it empirically and see what impact does IT have on the reputation of hospitals. So here's the quick outline of introduction theory, methods, results, and discussion. I should mention that our discussant has done a wonderful job. I had a preview of the comments that she has, but we didn't give her much because it's still a work in progress. Even though a lot of work has gone into it, there is not a real working paper. So I welcome any comments from you all as well. So here's some of the extant research. Many of you are in the room who have done work in the economic value of IT. We've looked at the moderating and mediating factors that link IT investment and firm performance. But we have also found that there is very little to show for in terms of the impact of IT on social value of IT. There were references made actually this morning in two of the presentations. I took notes. Jeff, you talked about socially incentivized. So there is a social angle to it in terms of adoption and abandonment. Jiang Lin, you talked about a little bit on the complementarities of the market leader, which is kind of a mimetic effect where people try to imitate the leaders. So there is not much work empirically done that looks at the social value that IT brings in addition to the economic and productivity and so on. So our focus in this study is going to be different from economic value, particularly focusing on the social aspect. And our research question is, how do IT investments shape external social judgments of an organization? Social judgment is actually a broader category, which I'll quickly talk about in a minute. And then we'll be using a theory of social judgments of organizations. There are two theories of social judgments, one at the individual level and one at the organizational level. So that's the one we are going to use. So here's a quick overview of research that has been done. Don't worry about the details of this, but essentially what I want you to see is that we have the payoff type in each of these areas: operational payoff, financial payoff, psychological payoff, societal payoff, and then on the right-hand side, the extreme right, the grayed area is where our contribution is expected to be in all these other areas. Many of you have done economic and financial impacts. Some of you are in the room here. But you will see at the bottom on the right-hand side corner, there are not a lot of references that deal with societal payoff or the social payoff, so which is where we hope to make our contribution. So here's the definition of social judgment. And there are three categories of social judgment. We will focus on only one, which is reputation. The other two are legitimacy and status. There has been some work done on that, including some of my work on the legitimacy aspect, and the status is the third one. So we'll focus on the reputation part, which is defined there as a set of attributes inferred from a firm's past actions and then ascribed to the firm as to the actions that the firm took. So let me just move over to conceptual model. The conceptual model here shows the IT expenditures, and we are capturing three types of IT expenditures affecting reputation through effectiveness and efficiency, which is the focus of our study. The work that is still in progress is going through impression management, which is where organizations deliberately shape the impression of their organization through media, through other forms of communication. So that's not yet part of this research. So our data and setting is National Health Service of England. How many of you are familiar with NHS? Great. So NHS is a kind of a different animal than the health systems that we know of here in the US. It was established in 1948. Here is what they said on the bottom left. It will provide you with all medical, dental, and nursing care, everyone, rich or poor, man, woman, or child. You can use any part of it. But they also said this is not a charity because it's based on taxes. So it's a centralized national health system, and we are focusing on the one in England only. So our data has non-specialist hospitals, and there's a reason why we didn't include specialist hospitals. There are 153 trusts. Trusts are like mini health systems. On an average, a trust has about 2.5 hospitals. So our data covers all the hospitals in England, so it's not a sample. 120,000 beds, 12 million admissions, lots of spending, as you can see, over $1 billion. Our data collection came from multiple sources, including the Department of Health of England, NHS itself, the Care Quality Commission, which is like our joint commission. Dr. Foster's is sort of like our health grades. It's the name of a company, actually, Dr. Foster's, that publishes quality standards and so on. Our period covers a 6-year period for this data, between 2002 and 2007, and 765 observations. So this is how we calculated reputation. Don't worry about the formula. What it really is showing you is we looked at the positive words and normalized them by the total word count of an article, and then we looked at the negative words that emerged in the media. And we used a text mining software called LWIC, which stands for, there's a name for that, yeah, word count, thank you. We looked at more than 2,000 outlets of publications. These included tabloids, newspapers. That was quite a challenging task to take all of that in, convert them into text, and then be able to analyze them. Okay. These are the three measures of IT investment, which is equipment, services, staff, and these are actually revenues. We measure them as ratios of IT expenditure to total revenue, so we can normalize size of the hospital, and we've lagged the effect by 1 year. Efficiency was captured as the average length of stay. Effectiveness was mortality ratios. We are all familiar with those, and they are measured quite the same way in England as they are here in the US. Here are our results. I know it's very small type, and you've seen a lot of numbers today, but let me just summarize those results for you. Here's what we found, that IT expenditures affect hospital reputation directly, and those you can see here in the numbers. I can't point the pointer, but if you look at IT investments, which is in the top box, that has a direct effect on reputation, which is the column 4 and 5. And then also indirectly, because you will see that IT investment affects mortality, which is column 1, and mortality in turn affects the reputation, which is at the bottom of column 3 and 5. So you have a direct effect as well as indirect effect of IT expenditure on reputation. And the indirect effect, as you can see, comes through risk-adjusted mortality. So we are finding some interesting results there, even though, as I said, this is a work in progress, and we are trying to still refine our measurement of how we measure reputation. So here is a couple of questions that I would like you to think about as you ask questions in the later part of the session. Is our literature review missing something in the way we classified? Are there alternative paths to IT investments and external social judgments that we have not yet modeled? In terms of theory, do our measures that you saw of social judgments, especially reputation, appear plausible to you? And what do you think about the effect of timing and duration, which we used for 1-year lag? And our data that we collected was 1 year beyond the data that we had from NHS on quality and efficiency. In terms of work in progress, where we are taking this work, is we are looking at impression management as one of the mediation paths that you saw on our model. We are also refining our reputation measure because we see low R-squares and high variance. And that's okay for now because we believe that there are many other things that affect reputation of hospitals in addition to IT, and that's why we are seeing smaller effects. But hopefully, with our refinement of the reputation measure, we'll be able to improve that. So with that, I'll give you back 2 minutes and 51 seconds. Thank you very much.
So from this paper, I think this paper, the nice thing is it's a very fresh topic for me. Although I have worked on the health IoT adoption for a few years, and I haven't seen a paper like this from the angle like a social value of the IT adoption of the hospital. And so the primary result, Professor Rajiv Kohli already mentioned, so I will not repeat. So I just talk about some of my own impression. First, from theory perspective, my own research is about IT adoption in healthcare at the individual level. Surely when I do research or literature review, you will find a lot of health IT adoption at the organizational level. So I may think there are some possible study theory could be included or considered. It's by DiMaggio and Paul, 1983, and back time, and this institutional theory and theory of social judgment. Oh, they included, and so social learning theory is from psychology research, and that's also from individual level. That just means the social learning when people the people around them doing something, they try to mimic this behavior. Either is adopt a new technology or just some action. And in the research, we have called the herding effects or informational cascades. And then that's also this at both level, at organizational level, or sometimes also at the individual level. Like when people see, when organizations in other organization adopt a new technology, and they just follow, and they don't consider their own, information. So they just call herding effects or informational cascade. Network externalities, that's a little different. Network externalities just mean when one organization see other adopt a new technology, and the benefits of will increase when the number of adopters in the network all adopt these new technologies. For example, like when the fax machine
or landline phone, or email, when those new technology emerged, the benefit have been increased. Most of us all use this technology. Only 1 or 2 people use those new technology will not bring benefits. This is from a theory perspective. And from the empirical, like for text mining, I did a little, not too much about text mining. Usually there's for their social value, since this is a dependent variable, they all text mine from the media. So my question or suggestion, now they use the word frequency count as the negative or positive words count as a social value. I wonder, could we add some weight or impact factor to the media? You get negative words or not. No, if this hospital was mentioned in the big media and by negative words, probably this impact is much larger than this hospital was mentioned in a small, very narrow field media. And another thing is a topic model or theme identification. In text mining, surely the most easier way we can identify the number of words, the frequency of words is mentioned in a document or a bunch of documents. But sometimes we may find an abstract topic around a bunch of words, a group of words. For example, like in healthcare, for doctor online reviews, when they review doctors, if a lot of words around a bunch of topic, a bunch of documents, is they mentioned about on time, or too long, or efficient. So those words together, we may abstract a topic. It's kind of about scheduling. Okay, so this is a topic model. Sentiment analysis is we try to identify the words, the subjective meaning from the words, the text mining result. So the last from the panel data, the causal, we try to identify causal inference. Surely they already control fixed effect. I just wonder, do you control the time effects? I don't see that. But you control. Okay, sorry. No, that's okay. So that's all my comments. And now it's open time for the questions for all the 4 presenters.
My question is for Kohli. A couple of things. From the input side, when you look at cost of investments in IT, typically in most organizations, the hardware cost, the software cost, and the people cost are not represented in the IT budget, but communications is a separate department in many hospitals, and their budget may be different. I don't know how it is in England, but that may be something worth looking at. From our own work, we see that. The other aspect that we thought of from some of our healthcare work was that when you look at text mining and positive words, they may be the positive words about the cleanliness of the hospital, and which we were talking about yesterday, and about the food and things like that, and how much of that really represents on the output side the words, and maybe on the care and the quality of the care. Or something that is much more germane in terms of our reputational aspect. Is it so? You may want to prune some of the words from the words that you have scanned for positive and negative words, and that might fine tune the result a little bit more. And I thought that. Some of the theories that were presented was very good, but again, our old friend RBV might also be, she has thrown up several theories, and investments, you look at RBV, I know it's an old hack, quite a bit, RBV, but still, it's a theory that fits if you look at IT investments, and then there are resources. My last aspect on reputation is that how many of the people on the internet who look at this conversation really choose a hospital based on the reputation? Because, and as we spoke, certain types of ailments like something for the eyes or dental practice or certain kinds of hernia treatments, there's greater mobility, or in cancer there's greater mobility. Otherwise, there is that localized effect of going to the thing, and the local competition therefore has to be taken into account. In terms of the impact, so going forward from reputation to impact in terms of churn, that might be an extension of some of that work. Thank you, Rajiv.
I want to thank you very much for the comments. So you're right, the communication costs can be part of the reputation, which we are not including, but that's something we can certainly look into. We do have a lot of cost information by departments. In terms of food and other, it's interesting you mentioned that. Just this morning I got the list from one of my co-authors of all the keywords we're using, and all the authors are looking at them and trying to prune them to be more specific so that we can improve our algorithm. RBV, that's an interesting idea. We'll think about that. And in terms of the last comment that you made about the internet and how people choose hospitals, in fact, I will share with the audience what you told me about how you are doing that, or what the impact of reputation is. A lot of the impact of reputation is beyond patients choosing the hospital, particularly in England, where a lot of the budgets are based on the reputation, the status of the hospital, the doctoral or medical students that they get, or even a change in status of the hospital in England is dependent on the reputation. So there's something called a foundation trust, which is like a exclusive club where you have a lot more autonomy. So I see your point about the choice of hospital based on reputation on the part of the patients, but that's one of the several things that reputation affects. But we'll look into that through interviews and so on.
Yeah, there is also another impact which I get from India and here. I'll give you two examples. One in Hyderabad, many people think that one particular hospital has a very good reputation of providing good food. So when we look at reputation, we might have to, and as we go further and tease out further research beyond what looking at reputation more globally, reputation with respect to, and Catholic health systems and some of the hospitals that are more religious based, they have very good bedside manners. And when I spoke to some of the public relations officers of these places, they actually want to get away from just being known for good bedside manners to saying quality of that. So the reputation kind of pigeonholes you into a certain slot, and when you get pigeonholed into a certain slot, then there is a something at the back, dark recesses of your mind saying you are not the other thing, whereas they may also be good quality.
Yeah.
Presbyterian doesn't give you that example.
Yeah. So I suppose what you're saying is that reputation should be based on quality, cost, food, and communication, and all the other things.
It could be kind of a more formative construct.
Yeah. Thank you.